So last week, we spent some time reviewing some of the fundamental concepts of clinical research, different phases, different types of research being conducted, some of major regulations and guidelines that we are bound to follow as we conduct our research activities. Today's session, we will be focusing on more of application side of those concepts. So I'll try to walk you through the operational steps and requirements that you may need to know and you may need to follow as you do your research works within Horizon. So I'll start with the overview of Horizon's clinical research activation process, sort of walk you through how research studies are being activated, initiated here in Horizon Health Network. And then I move on to talk about the execution and management, a little bit about safety management, specifically AE and SAE management, and then study monitoring. And then end with a brief little bit of showing you around what sort of things are available in Romeo in terms of annual reapproval, amendments, and notification to REB. So, how do you envision your study activation? What I mean by that is that in your role as a research coordinator or a research assistant, or even as a research manager position, what is your expectation when it comes to the idea of opening a new research study? So, here's two most common cases or scenarios that I personally encounter, and it usually goes something like this. So, I get a call or email from a physician or a research nurse that who let me know that they have been approached by this really exciting research opportunity coming from let's say pharmaceutical industry or from another academic institution, that they've been approached to join this multi-site national level or sometimes international level clinical trial projects. And the first question I get the most often is, when is your next RIB submission deadline? Because I'd like to submit it, and how do I go about doing that? So, and then they look for Romeo and all that stuff. Or I get a call from physician saying that, he or she has this new proposal, study proposal that from one of their colleagues, and that, he agreed to take part and then asked me, so I agreed to do this. And then the sponsor, my colleague, he tells me that he has a secretary who can do all the submissions for me so that I don't have to worry about any of the paperwork. So I'm not sure if any of you can relate to this sort of example. So does any of this sound familiar to you, or is there someone that or certain individual that comes to your mind in this case? So as you can imagine, um, I end up actually telling them that what people don't like to hear, sort of playing like devil's advocate, I would say. So I would ask them, have you received a copy of a confidentiality agreement? Have you forwarded the document to your contracts office for a review? Do you have research staff to coordinate and manage research activities? And I will tell them that, I understand your enthusiasm. That's really great. But there are other logistical and operational component as well as legal financial contract regulatory like agreements that need to be looked at before even initiating any of the ethics application. And then I also get comments like this. It'll be like, oh, this is a really simple study. It's not a complicated trier. It's something we do every day in our clinic anyway. Or they will say, oh, this is really amazing study. And I have lots and lots of patients who could be on this study tomorrow. So, I mean, obviously, I wish I could have this like superpower to, get their wish project started right away. But as you know, that's not the case, because the real world of a clinical trials is very complicated and really time consuming process and labor intensive that involves many multiple stakeholders here. So as you can see in this diagram, we have regulatory agencies such as Health Canada, FDA, or we also have a sponsor who's responsible for overall conduct of the whole study. And then we have a site lead led by PI, principal investigator. And we also have a research ethics board who see activities to protect participant rights safety. So, and to make things more interesting or more complicated, it appears that not every clinical trials are activated in the same manner. that there is such different practices and process differences as to how research studies are activated from one institution to another. So I have created this, I would say, much simplified version of sort of like a process map of a Horizons clinical research activation process. And for now, I'm calling it as Clinical Research Activation Program, but looking at the acronym, maybe not the best choice of a title. So if you any of you could think of more suitable, maybe appropriate name for it, by all means, please let me know, because I hope to put this up in our research service webpage so that everyone can kind of view it, kind of visualize the process, because really it's our internal process. And today I will try to walk you through each of these processes that are listed here and let you know some key points and highlights of each process. So let's start with a study selection. So study selection normally starts when a potential sponsor, let's say a pharmaceutical company, approaches a research group or a physician with a new research opportunity. When you get this initial interest email, the first course of action would be to notify your doctor, your investigator, who's in charge of reviewing the incoming research opportunity. Typically, the first email doesn't really have much information about that study. It's just about little, maybe study title and perhaps a little brief description about the study. At this point, you don't even have the full protocol to review. So, but if there's an interest for it, that you are interested to know the full detail about the study, what you need to do first step is ask for a document called CDA, and CDA stands for confidentiality disclosure agreement, and that need to be forwarded to your contract budget office. And I've learned over the years that we also want to get the Word version of it. Sometimes they tend to send out the PDF version, but it's because we want to review it and edit it, right? Our contract person. So anyway, so we have seen in previous days that some doctors, some investigators end up just signing the form without even going through our contracts office, and that is not a good practice at all. So the first communication with your potential sponsor, we strongly recommend that you be in touch with our contract person, you know who that is, Karin, for a further instruction. In the later slides, we have a specific section dedicated just for the contract stuff, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. So the full execution of CDA, the confidentiality agreement, would normally allow the team to gain a full access to the study protocol. And this is a perfect time to really get started on, really in-depth review of a feasibility assessment. So we'll start with, thorough review of the study protocol, and then we identify, what type of intervention or, non-interventional components are there in the study. So standard of care versus non-standard of care, and who would be involved in that to execute that non-standard of care procedure. And have we done, as a research group, have we done any similar studies previously? What was that experience like? What's the expected workload compared to existing studies? Do we have a sufficient resource to run the study? What additional supports are likely to be needed? So all those things need to be considered at this point. And even I would go even further to inquire to those potential support department and to see what their interest is like and what their availabilities are like. I mean, yes, maybe it will be 3 months or 6 months down the road that you actually activate that study. But even then, you need to know where other departments are in terms of their availability, resource availability. So, and also we highly recommend that you communicate with us in this stage early on and try to identify additional support that you can get from us as well. Another important, sorry, you will be getting a form called feasibility assessment form as well. So you will be filling that out to submit to the sponsor. Another really important point I want to bring out here is that it's important that you do your own research about the sponsor as well, because in terms of who they are. They may be a big, well-known pharma, or they may be a small, rather smaller company that's kind of relatively new to the field as well. So look at their experience and also how their vision kind of compare up to align well with your research group as well. Looking at their overall recruitment goal, how many participants are they looking for within how many specified month or year, and does that work for your team? So all those things really need to be considered ahead of time. If your research group is relatively new to the field with not much research experience, Um, if that's the case, some sponsors, some industry sponsor, they would request what's called site qualification visit. So that is to really to assess the capability and feasibility to run the study. So can your site handle the study given the resources and facility that's available site level? And the visit could be in person or could be conducted virtually. So they may send out someone from from the company or from a CRA from a contract organization, something like that. So let's say you've done your feasibility assessment survey, you've looked at your resource availability, and then the site qualification visit was completed, and after some time you get official notice saying that you've been selected as a site. So that's very exciting. What's your next step? So at this point, I think you kind of figured out that we don't want you to jump into Romeo and to submit ethics application. So before jumping into the ethics submission, there's two very important steps to be initiated at this point. So that is, first is to initiate the review of study contracts. So clinical trials agreement. So that's again through contract budget office. And then to reach out to the department that you've communicated previously, letting them know that you've been selected as a site and really go on to review details about the service that's required for that study and really make an arrangement that would be really realistic and feasible to the situation of that department as well as yours. So plan ahead of time. So make sure confirm that arrangement before even submitting your ethics application. I'm really emphasizing that because we have seen actually too many studies being kind of dropped out or canceled last minute after all the work because of the support issue, because of a budget challenge, because of resource availability and things like that. So please, I highly recommend that, spend as much time as you need securing that support from other department, making sure that your budgets and agreement language is in line with what you do. All that is settled, then you can submit the ethics applicant. That will be my first recommendation. When it comes to submitting your application through Romeo portal, we do have a research manual that's available as well as a checklist available in our webpage. So reference that, and also we have Q&A session that's offered routinely by Bryn Robinson. So feel free to check out when the next session is, and then feel free to ask your questions as well. So that now you have fully executed the study agreement and the budget has been negotiated and confirmed. You have ethics approval. So next would be to really fully activate and then, plan for the first recruitment, I would say. So I kind of talk briefly on that as well. So this is just a summary of all the highlights that I have covered up until this point. So really the key message is don't jump into from study selection to ethics submission right away. Take as much time as possible, sufficient time to confirm, to conduct your feasibility review, to confirm your department of support, contract, and budget. All those things need to be confirmed. Any questions so far? Okay, we're good. So now that I want to talk a little bit about what happens after you've had your REB approval and agreement being fully executed. So you'll most likely be contacted by a sponsor or CRO asking to schedule a meeting called what's called a site initiation visit. It's SIV. Prior to COVID, I think a lot of the SIV used to happen in person format, but because of the pandemic and also cost saving reasons as well, we have seen many SIVs being conducted in virtual setting, and I think most of them are done virtually by now. So, um, and also around this SIV event, sometimes there's a lot of times there's a thing called investigators meeting. I'm not sure how many of you are actually familiar with it. So it's a meeting that is organized by sponsor, and that they invite, site representative, could be PI, could be coordinator, to be in one place, and they provide accommodation and things like that, and then they really provide full on education about the study. They go through every details about the procedure and the requirements and things like that, and this really is a great learning experience for especially for new coordinators, where they could meet, you could meet the other coordinator in other center who's doing the same thing as yours, and build a connection, and overall really fun event. Sometimes you miss it out because depending on at which point you join that study. If you miss out, it's good, it's okay, but you can ask for education material that was used for that meeting, and that will really be a great resource for you to learn, and also you can use that to train other folks in your team as well. Yeah, so that's that. mm, yeah, I think that's about it. Let's see. I just kind of briefly touch on some of the frequently asked questions about SIV. I think I've had a one or two team recently kind of reaching out to me asking about how to prepare for SIV. So I thought I would cover that here. So when is SIV scheduled? So it is scheduled after the full execution of the study contract, study agreement, and the ethics approval, before obviously patient recruitment or enrollment, before the official study activation. So who scheduled SIV? It's scheduled through agreement between the sponsor or sponsor representative and a site PI. How long does SIV last? Usually a full day, if not half a day. What arrangement need to be made for SIV and who should attend it? So if it's happening in person, obviously you have to think of the physical space and who will be attending it. If it were to happen in virtual setting, you have to think of meeting invites and virtual meeting arrangements as necessary. The more important part is you have to think of who's attending it. You have to have that discussion prior. So who attendee list. So who sponsor wants to meet maybe a pharmacist or someone from diagnostic imaging, or definitely PI. Your PI needs to be present. Maybe not the whole time, but at least for a short time period to do a short interview, Q&A, that sort of thing. And again, like folks from pharmacy or DI, they most likely should be available, because there may be a tour of the facility that they would like to, the sponsor would like to do. Um, yeah, and then what study documents will monitor review during SIV? What topics will be discussed during the SIV? So there's a lot of documents that we'll be going through during that visit, and there's obviously heavy focus on the review of the regulatory documents, documents that were submitted to ethics, essential documents pretty much. So if there is any interest, I can probably put up a list of essential documents in our group page for you to reference. Yeah, and then really the main purpose of this visit is to really to confirm the site's competence to conduct the study according to the protocol and in compliance with applicable regulatory requirements. So yeah, to confirm that, sponsor would like to make sure that you have all the operational plans and details worked out, and that everyone involved is sufficiently trained in their delegated roles and responsibilities. Do I have to have everything ready? Ready, not necessarily, but I would say that, Your SIV would be much more efficient if you have things prepared and organized, obviously. But I think more important thing for this event is that you really have to be asking questions. Um, the more questions you ask about the study, it doesn't look bad on you at all. It actually shows that you are more involved, you are more interested to learn, that you're open to share your site plan to your CRA. So that's really a good sign. So this really is a perfect chance for you to ask your questions. Excuse me. Most SIVs that I have attended previously, the first topic that comes up is usually talking about who's doing what. So like roles and responsibilities, and the communication arrangement as well. So how many coordinators and who's doing this step and who's doing the consenting and who's going to be the backup for you in case you're not available, things like that. And by this stage, I would assume that each research team member should really be clear on your roles and responsibilities that you've been assigned to. The easiest way to explain this question is obviously going through the delegation of authority log. So the delegation of authority log is one of the essential documents in clinical research. In the log, the principal investigator delegates study-specific duties to different members of a research study team. Each duty has a start date and end date and should be signed off by both PI and the individual delegate. If a staff member performs a duty that is not appropriately delegated, that is considered a major protocol deviation or GCP violation. And as you can see in this diagram here, there are multiple individuals and department group members that play specific roles for their research study. But it's important to remember that there is only one person who actually holds the ultimate responsibility of all the activities that are happening in this under the study. And that person is principal investigator. And I'm sure most of you by now have quite familiar with this form called the delegation of authority. So you see a section where you print your name, provide your signature and an initial. Under role section, you can enter your each specific roles that you are assigned to perform for that particular study. The code could be like alphabetical format or could be number format. And description need to be written in a really clear and concise manner so that anyone who looks at it can clearly understand what that is. It's also important to remember that the start date indicated on this form should reflect the real date that you're assigned to do the work. So really, if you are relatively new to your research team, by now, at least first couple weeks of your work, someone should be approaching you with this form for various studies, then assigning you what your roles are for that particular study. I have to say though, I have seen a case or cases where the start date here written here was actually later date than the date the person actually performed certain task for that study. And that is a problem, obviously. And I also have seen a case where this one particular individual actually filled out the entire section of this form. And that included the investigator initials and date. That's a major, major violation, as you can see. Yeah. I also like to mention that there are roles and duties that just cannot be delegated. And examples of those activities would be, I listed some here. So review of eligibility criteria, review of medication, review of emergency unblinding, study drug orders, test orders, interpretation of diagnostic or laboratory results, any other medical decisions, evaluation of a study-related tests results, assessment of AEs and SAEs, and also signing off on CRF, so case report form study visit data. So it's important that, you may be a registered nurse with, let's say, over 20 years of a clinical experience, but when it comes to clinical trials, Signing off on participant eligibility for a trial, it has to come from the investigator with someone with MD title and under PI or investigator. And so it's important to remember that because these duties are not delegated, there should be an evidence of investigator oversight when performing these tasks. Documented evidence of a training and qualification is very important. So one of the 13 GCP principles states that each individual involved in conducting a trial should be qualified by education, training, and experience to perform his or her respective tasks. So how do we provide evidence of a training, education, and experience? So this is why, as part of your ethics submission, we ask for a copy of your medical license or your license information for your professional license or CV, and also your training records, so GCP, TCPS2, or other relevant training records as well. Yeah. And you are obviously responsible for your own training records and filing of them. As I have listed here in previous slides, SOP. So I listed SOP training records and the protocol training records. So I'm going to kind of briefly talk about SOP here. So the SOP, as it says here, is a written instruction that set up processes to follow to ensure conformation to regulations, policies, and guidelines to perform a specific task. And SOP establishes procedural and training information for research teams. It provides auditors and regulatory authority inspectors with a tool to monitor adherence to regulations and guidelines. So at this point, I would like to kind of ask you a quick question here. So how many of you here today have completed your SOP review and training that is specific to your research group and your role within your group? If you have done it, I would like you to press 1 for me here. I'm just curious to know. Okay.
So I've done the Horizon SOP training, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, and also any other tasks that you do within your unit for your research works. Is there SOP? Then have you done your SOP training?
That's probably a sort of area of deficiency that it might be here at DMNB because I think we just go by the Horizon SOPs. Like I remember in 2013, Elizabeth Collins gave us New Brunswick Heart Center specific and related SOPs that would also apply to DMNB, but we don't have any update like since then. So I don't know, should I get
Yes,
updated New
that would be
Brunswick Heart?
something that you might want to look into. Because
Okay,
let's
so
say inspector comes and go, tell me, can you show me a document where it indicates how you do your daily work? How do you perform the task that you do, right?
well, the daily work, it's different sometimes every day. What do you mean, like recruiting and stuff, or?
Recruiting, or it could be consenting, whatever it might be that you do for your work. There's got to be one place. It may not be called SOP, it may be called something else. Maybe it's called a procedural manual or instruction manual. I'm not sure, but anywhere that has that, it's important to have that documentation.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you guys for answering. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's pretty good. Yeah. And how many of you here know where your SOPs are located in your research office? Press 2 for me if you can.
Yes, I have them in a.
It's important to know where that is, right? Good. Thank you guys. So a lot of you know where things are, so that's good because it really should serve you as a reference, right? It's not something that you create one and then let's say you document, you've read it and then be done with. No, it's something that this needs to be more of a living document that you go back and reference. And if it's something that doesn't really reflect what you do, maybe that needs to be revised. So this is a typical example of SOP table of contents. So as I just put it up as an example. So I do provide support and consultation for SOP write-ups and reviews and whatnot. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And you can also access. We do have, yes, HRPP SOP manual that is available through our Skyline link. But certainly there probably is a need for more creating something that is more specific to your research unit. And if that's the case and you need help with it, let me know. Yeah. So once you have your set of SOPs written up and that's been finalized and approved, a next step will be obviously, training, providing training opportunity. So you may be hosting or taking part in SOP training as well. So there are several ways to conduct the training here. So some examples I listed here, maybe you could do the quick protocol review, or this is more protocol review, I guess. Okay. So protocol review or protocol review training, that can be conducted within your research meeting if you have a regular routine research meeting, or it could be conducted, could be done through maybe lunch hour meeting, or it could be email communication. What I used to do was I would kind of create a protocol summary. This is just for the protocol training. Yeah. Protocol summary, maybe more like a one pager, and have that available in a clinic so that people who's not necessarily directly involved in research works every day, but still sees a patient who's part of the research. They know what's going on with that patient and the kind of, they can reference that as they provide care for that particular patient. Um, Key staff should really read the entire protocol, but there are staff that, they should be trained on at least, at minimum, be trained in study protocol sections that are relevant to them. Training formats, as I said earlier, could be self-read, or could be, there may be some material that's been provided by your sponsor, um, or you could have a specific site training that's in-person meeting. Yeah, the frequency of a training really should commensurate with the study activities. New research team member should be promptly retrained. Existing member should maintain their training records as necessary. Staff coming back from a certain period of leave time, then perhaps they need to be retrained on certain aspect of the study as well. Question here I have written here, do you have your training plan for a research group? Do you have training material ready and available? Do you have a training log prepared? Yeah. So now that everyone in your team have been assigned to specific roles and responsibilities, and you have provided a sufficient training, the whole study operation plan should really be pretty clear by now, pretty clear to you by now. So questions like, what's your plan for patient recruitment? How are you invited to the circle of care? Does your investigator and the patient care team know the steps and procedures that are required in patient recruitment process? And how and what sort of communication strategies are incorporated during initial informed consent process? Where is the signing of ICF taking place? What sort of pre-screening tools are prepared? What's the timeline for screening? How many weeks or days do you have to assess the patient eligibility? In which order should you screen the patient screening? So in case of a screen fail, can patient be rescreened after a certain time? And what about the follow-up schedule? So for certain trials, imaging, scheduling, and requirement could be could play a such significant role when it comes to planning patient treatment. So the frequency of the CTs or MRIs may be different than standard of care. And also the reading of these imaging may need to be followed up to certain criteria, and that is outside of a standard of care. And if that's the case, you will need to be really you'll be very helpful if you could establish a clear communication line between diagnostic imaging and you, and where you can be in touch with some touch with a designated staff and make sure that the imaging results and reports are reported as per study protocol. So the next couple of slides are just example of tools and templates that I often incorporated when I was doing my planning. So this is just an example of visit schedulers that I used to create as part of my initial planning. So I would create this schedule template in Excel spreadsheet and enter the date formula for the visit section. So once I have a new patient, once the patient's been randomized, once I enter that first date, the rest of the projected visit will appear, it will be populated automatically. And the study procedure that need to be followed for each visit will be already written in here. So that serves as a really good template. And once I create this, I would print it out, put it in the first page of patient chart, each patient chart. So whoever looks at it know exactly the status of the patient just by looking at this one page. And then another example here is I just pulled this out just to show you that, what procedure planning could look like. Um, so in my previous work as a study coordinator working for an oncology clinical trial unit, I used to prepare a binder for a department that provides service for a trial. So let's say, for example, I'd prepare one small binder for diagnostic imaging. And then, I'd prepare a really brief summary of the protocol and then include information that is relevant to them. So relevant to the diagnostic imaging portion of that particular study. So I put similar binder to, let's say, pharmacy and other department that I work with. And the most important thing here is to put your contact as well as the doctor information. So in case anybody has any questions or doubt, they know who to reach out to. Another important thing to note about this is though, once you set up a binder in other department, is fully your responsibility to update that information. So it's obviously extra work in that sense. But if your study is to be run next 2 years, 3 years, or even longer, maybe it's worth investing that time. So another strategy that you may want to consider is doing a mock patient run. So if you and your team could set up a day or a half day or a couple of hours to do a test run of all the screening or baseline visit, and that will give you an opportunity to review and evaluate your practice. One last thing I really want to emphasize here is that it's important to know that as a study coordinator, you really are in charge of your project in a sense that, you know, your research team members, including investigators, nurses, and everyone that's involved in that study, should really look at you as a point of contact person for your site. So let's say pharmacists in the pharmacy department and scheduling clerk and admitting, they have a part take, responsibility, and they are in charge of certain steps in the study. But the reality is that your trial is such a small part of their daily work. So your study is not their priority. So I really learned that in a hard way in my early days. So I just wanted to mention that here. Last example form I'd like to share is permission to be contacted for research. So in Horizon, most research studies are considered to be not part of standard of care, meaning that no person who's not part of patient's circle of care should not be accessing patient personal health information without permission. So we do have a few research groups who are exempt from this requirement. Oncology group would be one of them. So for oncology clinical trial group, research staff do have a permission to access and view patient records for consideration for potential research participation opportunity, mainly because many interventions and treatment opportunities, um, they're really closely tied to the patient's standard of care, that it makes sense that we do provide equal opportunity to all cancer patients with a possible access to the latest treatment chance, latest technology that's available there. So I just wanted to finish off this map first, and before I hand things over to Karine. So just talk a little bit about study completion and archiving. So when you're completing the study, you have to make sure these are some of the things that you might want to check off in your list. So make sure that all case report forms and data clarification forms Any queries have been resolved. If there's any frozen lab samples or anything that need to be shipped off to central lab, make sure those are taken care of. Central lab kits are discarded or returned. Make that arrangement. And same thing for any equipment that's been received by sponsor you need to make an arrangement as to how you do it, and that would be the same with your study drugs if that is applicable. Um, I would advise you to go through all the regulatory binder and to make sure that try to remove any duplicate documents. And then any invoice that hasn't been sent off, make sure to review that as well. All final study flow sheets to research office financial clerk for final departmental payments. Yeah, I think that's pretty important. So you do want to get paid. Site closure visit. So a closeout visit happens after the study complete and all data have been collected. Um, you would need to log into Romeo to submit notification to REB, so status change form. And then your monitor during the visit will go through the documents, do the final review of a trial center file, PI to sign off CRFs, sorry, delegation logs. Yeah, and then monitor and you would have to have a discussion about archiving responsibilities, and that will be indicated in the study agreement as well. So we do have SOP for that archiving section. I think it's SOP number 18. And there you will see the attachment called archiving form as well. Here, lastly, just kind of wanted to briefly touch on the topic of record retention period that was set by Health Canada. So as you know, as of February 11, 2022, the retention period for records of the clinical trials of drugs and natural health products has been reduced from 25 years to 15 years in Canada. So according to the notice you see in the slide, the change is intended to harmonize the country's clinical trial framework with that of its international partners. It is further intended to make Canada a more attractive country in which to conduct clinical trials by reducing the administrative burden on sponsors. Yeah, I think we already kind of covered this update during our previous coordinator meeting. So let me know if you have any questions on that. Um, before we go on a short break, I wanted to invite Corinne to cover this, work of budget and contract office because, as you know, it's just such an integral part of our clinical research operation, and it has such a huge impact. And basically, everything written on that agreement is what we do in our role. So, but somehow looks like it's been a little bit overlooked for some reason. So um, that's why I have invited Corinne this time to speak to us and share her expertise on that. Yeah, Corinne, you want to take over?
Yes, thank you, Stella. So good afternoon, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm based at the Moncton Hospital. I joined the team in May of last year. So I'm going to talk briefly about the process from CDA to CTA. So the CDA is a confidential disclosure agreement. So they are to be signed prior to sharing confidential information. So if you or a PI receive information about a CDA, you can just send it to my attention and I'll review before signatures. So protocol and other documents may have confidential information that sponsors need to safeguard. So this is why a CDA is needed. So once it's fully executed, information can be shared with the study team. If you decide to move forward with this study, inform the sponsor to confirm the site selection. And once the feasibility of the trial is confirmed, the impacted departments agree to support and participate. The RP submission and the contract budget revision can be done in parallel to avoid the delays. So I'll review the CT and the budget, and I'll discuss with you certain details like the recruitment numbers, the timelines, etc. And once the CTA and budget are final, we are bound legally to participate in the study. And then I send the CTA to Jacquelyn Legere, who is the HRPP director, to ensure compliance and before sending for signatures. When it's fully executed, I send the final CTA to the study team, REB and Teresa Yeomans. She's at the research office clerk, and she can also help you with the flow sheets and the invoicing. So this resumes quickly the agreement process. So if you need templates of CAs, support letters, list of fees, you can contact me and I'd be happy to share. So do you have any questions on the budget and contract section?
Karine, anyone have any questions or comments?
No comments per se, just I mean, no questions per se for me, but just a comment from recently working with Corinne from our Health Canada inspection, like how fabulous she is.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah,
So are
thank you.
you. You've
Oh,
been
thank
very helpful with the Cloud DX agreement process.
Yeah, thank
For
you so
sure.
much. Yeah, it took them a while to review and stuff, and I saw Dr. Brunt asked me to review those edits from UNB. I mean, I looked at them quickly and they looked fine, and I didn't review like specifically the quarterly payments, but I was just like, well, if Corinne did this, I think I don't need to check. It's just good to go from working with her. I'm pretty sure if Corinne did this, this is fine.
Well, thank you, Sarah. But however, I sent it to UNB yesterday, and they have comments as well. So I think we may need to change it again. So I'll be in contact with you to make sure that we
So
have
does
the
that
correct
mean
documents.
the physicians need to sign again?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I'll contact you separately after this.
They were gonna
But it's no big
just
deal. It's just
Dr.
little
McKinnon
sections.
already was like, this is so ridiculous. Oh man. Okay, we gotta sign again. Yeah, but no changes like I saw. I mean, I didn't check the exact amounts for those quarterly payments, but I trust you. So I'm
Oh,
sure
no,
it's
that's nothing with the budget is fine. It's just like the format, and I think they wanted the protocol to be attached at the end.
okay. Yeah, but we can't
Yeah.
do that until REB approval, right? So
Yeah. I'll
So
yeah, I'll
yeah,
contact you to make
yeah,
sure.
guys.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So, thanks, Karine, for giving us really nice, really valuable information here. But my point I really want to emphasize here is that, we don't, as a coordinator, I understand that, out of your busy duties and responsibilities that you do daily, we don't really think too much of the contract. We kind of automatically assume that things are just right in place, but you never know. And the other highlight I want to bring out here is that contract is not something that is done and done deal at the beginning of the study. It could also be impacted by how you do your work. And if it doesn't align with what you actually do for the project, that contract needs to be looked at again. And
Yeah,
that's
that's a good
Karine's
point. Yeah.
work, right?
That's a good point. And
Um,
throughout the duration of the study, they may be
yeah,
amendments to the protocol that will change the agreement
yeah,
language. And most likely the sponsor will let you know. So when they do contact you with a contract amendment, just let me know. And
yeah,
I'll be looking
definitely.
at the amendment as
Yeah.
well.
So like the simplest example I can think of is that, let's say there is a language specified just for the study monitoring, let's say. And it turns out that because of the change of monitoring, let's say you're doing from in-person monitoring to remote monitoring, and then that which end up involving more of labor, more work hours on your end. Maybe that's something to consider as a team. Should we revisit our study agreement to see, is there any room that we can ask for extra funding, extra money from our sponsor for the work that we do?
I
So
did
that would
put
be
some
like,
language in
yeah.
there about the remote
Mhm.
monitoring because it is a challenge, and sometimes we need to ensure that the sponsors are okay with remote monitoring. So they need to know in advance that they may not be able to come to the site, depending on what phase that we're at the hospital. So
So One of the objectives of a clinical research for the investigation of products is to determine the safety of the investigation product or treatment. So, this objective is mainly accomplished by assessing and recording any noted adverse events that occur during a trial. And it is essential that all AEs, including serious adverse events, which may occur during the course of the research patient involvement in a study, are appropriately identified, documented, reported, and managed in order to ensure the patient's continuing safety. And this is the responsibility of the investigator as well as investigator site. So the definition of AE and SAEs are specific to each study, and guidelines for documenting and reporting the event should really be detailed in the study protocol as well. The investigator and the study team must be familiar with the various reporting definitions, requirements, and reporting timelines that must be followed based on the applicable regulations, guidelines, and ethics board policies. For the purpose of this session, and I just want to be clear that the most terminology and concept that are introduced in session is from the ICH GCP E6R2, and that will be covered in detail. So here you see the definitions. I'm not going to read them all. So let's look at this diagram instead of reading all the long definition here. So the diagram is to help you understand how each terminology could be identified and overlap one another. So when it comes to adverse event, it's one that being more of a general term that indicates anything that refers to anything that's unwanted reaction or effects, but do not have to be related to the use of the study drug. Once an AE has been definitively linked to the use of the study drug, the event is then considered to be an ADR, so that is adverse drug reaction. ADR could be either serious or not serious, and it could be unexpected or expected, perhaps. So AEs that are serious, unexpected, and associated with the use of a study drug that need to be reported to the local REB within the specified time frame. The timeline to report could really depend on one would be the study protocol specification as well as a local ethics policy. And this is a little flow diagram that to show you the steps to follow when it comes to the collection of AEs. So it starts with identification and then record the AE, and then AEs are to be reviewed and assessed by investigator to determine its causality to the study intervention. Once the AE is being identified, recorded, and graded, it needs to be closely monitored through the course of the study until those are resolved. Let's start with the identification of AEs. So AEs may be directly observed by research staff or reported spontaneously by the participant or reported in reply to an open-ended questions. So data for AEs could also come from objective measures such as lab reports, or can be more subjective, such as patient's report of nausea. So example of this observed AEs could include maybe a new rash that was noted during a physical examination, or it could be an abnormal laboratory result that was considered clinically significant. It could be a headache that the patient mentions during a study visit, which was actually not present during at the baseline or during the medical history interview. And it is a responsibility of the research team to investigate, identify, and classify adverse events. More specifically, it is the responsibility of the qualified investigator, principal investigator, to provide an initial assessment of whether the event was possibly or probably caused by the study intervention. Um, yeah, so the example here, the sorry. So AE identification example here. So it says that research participant begins a study and the investigator notes that the participant reports a history of mild headaches located in the front of his head, occurring every month or so after a stressful day at work. After administration of the investigation product, the patient complains the headaches are occurring 2 to 3 times a month, which is increased in frequency, and are painful enough to prevent him from working and are located in the front and back of his head. So that change in nature. So and are unrelated to stress at work. So would these change be considered as an AE? So answer to that is yes, because we have increase in frequency, increase in severity, and change in nature. And those changes from baseline would indicate that this is a new AE that needs to be identified and documented. Um, yeah. So again, to summarize it, the investigator should really consider the possible relation between the AE and the investigation product in light of the baseline condition. If a baseline condition diminishes and then reappears, it also must be recorded as an AE. AEs should be recorded from the time a research patient is consented to participate in the study and until the final study visit, unless otherwise defined in the study protocol. It is often unclear whether individual signs and symptoms should be recorded instead of grouping them into syndromes or general diagnosis. So, for example, if a patient has a cold, um, should coughing and fever be recorded as a separate entity or or should the experience be recorded as a cold? So right now, there really isn't standardized guideline around that, but it's important that sponsors should really specify what is appropriate to record for that particular study protocol. So that way, all the data collected from across the nation, across all the sites, are consistent all the way through. So that's really communication that you need to have with your sponsor ahead of time. And also make sure there's a clear communication as to how you record these things, right? So it may be necessary to distinguish between an AE and a sign or symptoms of a disease or a condition being studied. So often research sponsors will create a separate forms to capture common disease symptoms or procedure-related events as specified in this protocol. So example of this would be the incident of a transfusions during and after coronary bypass surgery. This information is collected to determine whether differences in disease symptoms or progression of disease also might be drug-related events. So the captured AEs need to be graded or otherwise evaluated with respect to their relatedness to the study intervention. The severity, which typically refers to the intensity of the event, is generally indicated as mild, moderate, or severe, or life-threatening, as you can see in this table here. Or for some studies, there is a numbered grading system, such as it could be grade 1, neuropathy, grade 2, nausea, and so on. Or severity could be assessed by its effect on activities of daily living, as you can see here as well. So different grading system tools may be used for different study design and different type of research. Again, that's something that you need to have an in-depth review of your protocol and see what's specified in there. Guidelines to grading systems are typically described in the study protocol. It's important that you understand the grading system and that you are able to provide the necessary assistance when communicating AE information with your research team as well as your study investigator. One example I'd like to show here is that difference between severe and serious. So remember that it says mild chest pain, which results in a hospitalization. So the grade of a severe is not the same as serious. So the word serious in this context refers to more of an outcome of an event or a specific term used in determining whether AEs must be reported to sponsors and regulatory agencies. So a serious is more of an indication of outcome of an event defined earlier. Severe is used to describe the intensity of an event, classified as mild, moderate, or severe. So you may have a severe rash resolving on its own, which is not considered a serious adverse events for most cases, I would say. A severe headache is not necessarily a SAE. So, yeah, the causality refers to the likelihood and extent that investigation product being contributor to the development of the AE. Because the determination of a causality involves medical decision making, only an investigator who has a medical expertise should be making the causality and relationship determination. Another important element for evaluation of AE is the duration of the event. Onset of event should be measured from the onset of signs and symptoms. Resolution of the event should be recorded as well, typically defined as the point when all signs and symptoms have subsided. If the event includes multiple episodes of the same symptom, so for example, intermittent pain after a procedure, the sponsor should indicate how they are to be recorded. So really check with your sponsor to see your monitor to see how they would like you to record that or track that. Some events continue or change in severity over time. So capturing this information is also important. Changes in severity, such as when an event improves from severe to mild, should be recorded as a separate entity, separate event, with a separate intensities and duration collected, unless directly, unless advised differently by your sponsor. So the ongoing nature of the event should be noted in a source document as well. So yeah, that should be recorded as well. So it's important to recognize the different reporting requirement and expectations set by your sponsor, as well as the local requirements as well. Some practical tips and suggestions. Study your protocol. I think I already kind of mentioned that several times. Um, Try to plan a well-organized patient visit. That really helps. Reviewing your patient chart from the previous visit and looking at the AE list really helps to save time and work more efficiently. Communicate with your investigator. That's obviously the key. Try to assist your investigator with the sufficient study document to make appropriate decisions. So, excuse me, maybe you want to have a copy of a protocol or a specific section that's relevant to that AE that you're investigating quickly reference to as he's making his decision. Separate running log of pre-existing condition, so also known as medical history, is to be kept and well reviewed as well. And consider having maybe a separate SAE binder for each trial if that's necessary to flag it and to see easy to follow up. Try to review and make sure the patient medication lists match up to the AE and as well as the medical history as well. If there's any discrepancy or anything unclear, try to go back and try to ask your questions to the patient. I'm sure they will be willing to help you to clarify any questions. And don't afraid to ask questions and seek clarification. And again, documenting everything is really the key here. Questions so far relating to AE, SAE? Because I know I probably didn't cover all the detail about everything, but I just wanted to, don't want it to go into too much of detail, knowing that this is session for more of an introductory. So I hope that was enough, but if not, by all means, please let me know. Yeah. Study monitoring. This is the last topic for today. No, it's the second last one. Okay. So starting with the definition of a monitoring. So this is a definition from ICH GCP E6. So it says that monitoring is the act of overseeing the progress of a clinical trial and of ensuring that it is conducted, recorded, and reported in accordance with the protocol, standard operating procedures, good clinical practice, and the applicable regulatory requirements. So the purpose of the clinical trial monitoring are to make sure that, again, the rights and well-being of the participants are protected, the reported data are accurate, complete, verifiable from source documents, and that the conduct of a trial is in compliant with the protocol, GCP, as well as other applicable regulatory requirements. Um, I'm pretty sure most of you have already kind of had a visit from one of your monitors, whether it might be remotely or in person setting. Um, Monitors are normally appointed by a trial sponsor or someone from a contract or research or organization that are the represent the study, sponsor end of the study. So the monitor should be appropriately trained and should have the knowledge needed to adequately monitor the trial. But sometimes, you may be a little bit surprised to run into a certain monitors who maybe not necessarily have all the I don't know, expertise in certain therapeutic area, which is a possible. Um, but I would like to point out though that lack of medical knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that the person's not able to conduct appropriate review. What I mean by that is that oftentimes your monitors could really be a great resource and another support to help you answer your questions or clarify certain things because as you know these monitors travel all over the places to see different they've seen how different sites operate for the same study, so they may have some great tips and advices that may offer anything uncertain, anything you're struggling. I would share with them and just say ask for their clarification or support. They'll be more than happy to help you out in that way as well. And I found this really interesting, helpful. Um, it's a web page and there's a PDF there. I put the link there that it really nicely summarized about what study monitoring is. It talks about different types and how the sponsors conduct and plan their monitoring process. So I kind of put that link there for you to look for your interest. I'd like to briefly touch on about the different types of monitoring that's happening there, the most common ones I should say. So it could be on-site monitoring. Not in here, sorry. On-site monitoring is that, well, okay, sorry, let's type of monitor. Let's start with the source data verification. So it's this process by which the data within the case report form or other data collection system are compared to the original source of information. So that's pretty straightforward. It's basically, whatever you enter in their electronic case report form system match up to the original data where you collected information from. So that's a review. They used to do, I think back in the day, I think they used to do 100% SDV. So that's basically monitor coming in person, reviewing every single patient, every single data to make sure that every data match up to the original source. That's quite time consuming and must be a lot of money as well. There's other source data review. So it's a review of a source documentation to check the quality of the source. So not only looking at that data points or numbers, actually reviewing the value, the quality of the source to see if that actually makes sense to the study eligibility criteria. So they're reviewing that in more in-depth review, I would say. So there's different ways that monitor can look at your data when they come in for a visit. Um, just to let you know that the ICH GCP, they do not mandate 100% STV or required to be always, it's not a requirement. So what the sponsors have come up with over the years is that they've kind of decided to move on to what's called a risk-based approach. So rather than going 100% review, they identify certain sites that kind of show them as more of a higher risk than other site. And they have all their different risk factor matrix that they measure up to it. And depending on that risk assessment, we may be selected for different monitoring planning or regimen depending on the type of study and the involvement of that project of our site. So it's important here that this monitoring plan should be discussed, should be agreed prior to the study initiation, prior to activating any study, prior to putting in any first patient into your study. all that language and agreement should be clear in your study agreement. Again, we're coming back to the study agreement, and also the budget would affect it as well. So that there should be a discussion about how often do you plan to do your monitoring, and who's going to be coming in. Is that going to be a CRO representative? Is that going to be someone from directly from the sponsor end? And what's going to be the mode of the monitoring? Would it be in person, or would it be a remote monitoring? If it were to happen in remote monitoring, what are the requirements, technical things, arrangements that need to be set up here? So all those little details need to be talked about and needs to be agreed and needs to be written in writing. Lastly, I wanted to talk about internal reviews and audits and monitoring. So all research studies that are happening under the umbrella of Horizon, they all go through HRPP, Human Research Protection Program, and also REB review. And any research that happens, they are subject to internal quality assurance reviews, audits and reviews. That is to ensure the compliance with applicable regulations, guidelines, and standards that govern the clinical research, as well as relevant our HRPP SOPs as well, and Horizon policies and privacy legislations as well. So there's a lot of requirements, regulatory requirements that we're working under. So we want to make sure that we're working in an efficient manner that meets the requirement, and also it's safe for the patients. So this is to be conducted in a collegiate manner and are intended to be a positive and collaborative experience, help support high quality research within Horizon research community. So I just kind of briefly listed the different types of reviews that I conduct. So there is directed audits, also known as a for cause, and there is requested audits, and there's routine audits as well. So I don't think I would be going into too much detail about the specifics of the audit, but just to let you know that there is a system in place that to make sure that we are making sure that everyone follows what's required and there is a proper support is available. The specific SOP relevant to that is SOP number 29. It's called the Quality Assurance Audits of Horizon Research Sites. So please check that out and let me know if you have any questions. Okay. Number 5, this is really the last section of our talk today. So annual reapprovals, amendments, and notification to REB. I just wanted to spend just short time talking about REB submission process, and specifically about approvals, amendments, because those are really the most common ones. So as you know, throughout the course of research study life cycle, changes happen to certain aspect about your study that you need to make changes to your study plan, and you need to report that, update that information to relevant people, to the groups who may be affected by those changes. So for example, during the course of your active recruitment period, there may be an incident or two that ended up requiring you change a certain eligibility criteria or change of a follow-up schedule, let's say, because of the safety reasons. So any changes to that study protocol, that we call it amendments, will need to be reported to REB. If you are one of the many sites participating in multi-site study, let's say, it's usually the sponsor who kind of prepares that amendment package and sends you a notice. And then along with that notice, you will often get what's called action plan as to how you should execute that amendment. So there is a plan for how you can communicate with your REB and what steps should be taking place. Maybe it's required that you need to even contact the patient even prior to submitting to REB, or you could be doing that at the same time. Depending on the nature of the amendment, the action will be different. And if you are someone who's initiating the whole project, then you're making that decision of going through an amendment. You have to think of the next course of action. Who are the most affected individual or the group that impacts the patient, maybe safety or patient willingness to stay in the study. All those things need to be considered. And also, obviously, just submitting that information to REB will be a very important piece that need to be taken care of as well. So annual renewal, reapproval is a mandatory reporting requirement to REB, basically providing update as to where the study's at, site level, as well as global level maybe. And all clinical trials need to be submit annual reapproval as long as they're open. So it's critical. It's important that you don't miss that approval deadline. And the Romeo system will normally send out an email reminder, I think 3 months prior to. You will get a notice from Research Ethics Board stating that your study so and so is about to expire by when. So please submit your annual reapproval. And that's a good chance for you to be in touch with your investigator and figure out how to fill that out. It's not anything complicated form. The form itself is pretty simple, I would say. So usually ask for a number of participant consented, screened, withdrawn, completed. If there has been any amendment since the last approval, any SAEs to be reported and things like that. So once we have the RB approval, and again, you would send that correspondence to your sponsor. Here, I thought I would just kind of put a quick snapshot of, oh, there's a question. Sorry, Beverly, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, guys, I just had to turn my mic on. Just curious about some of the questions. Some of them aren't applicable to our site. So I don't know who we would contact, like, to get the questions changed. Like, you know how there's only like 2 answers and there's not like a field that says like, that you can put NA or whatever, like there's only 2 options, like closed study because of recruitment or closed because the sponsor wanted it closed or something. But sometimes for us in Moncton, it was not one of those reasons.
What was the reason, if you remember?
Yeah, sure. Just because like we just decided not to go through with the study because of issues on site or whatever. Like I have, a bunch of
Okay.
SAEs
Okay,
or,
I'm just trying
you
to
know what I
think
mean?
of what other options were there. Was it
I think it's just closed at site or closed by sponsor. Those were the only options, and there was no field to say like
oh, I
NA or
see.
a comment to say like,
Bev,
sure, yeah.
I was doing them today, so it's on the annual reapproval sheet, and it says like it says it's for the recruitment. So it's either like what's the reason why recruitment ended? Either
Okay, I see,
you
I
met
see.
you met your recruitment goals at site or globally, but a lot of the times it's not those 2 reasons. It's either we just closed it because it closed even though there was no full recruitment. Like we have a
Okay.
trial now that they're closing
Okay.
early because
Okay.
it's not giving them the primary endpoints that they wanted.
So if you're closing a study, why are you filling out an annual reapproval? Why aren't you still submitting the change in status form?
Oh, it's also it's on the same forms. Like it's always that recruitment questions that are on each of the forms.
Oh, so you have the same question being asked even for change in status form?
I think so. Let me just open it up.
Yeah, you can
But
open it up.
it's on
Yeah.
multiple forms, and we were
Is
running
that
into the
right?
same
Okay.
issue. And I
Okay.
did send Bryn an email about it before,
Okay, good. Yeah.
just with a
Yeah.
suggestion to remove it
Okay,
or
sure.
add
Yeah. We'll
options.
definitely have a look at that for sure. Thanks for letting us know. Yeah. So, because I would assume that if your study has never really started, let's say in your case, I would assume, then it would be like change in status form, right? So I wonder, I don't exactly remember what question that was under the
Yeah.
change in status form. Yeah, I'm not
So
sure.
I have a specifics example, or we can just reconvene about this later. Stella, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so I thought I would do like put up this snapshot of this page because this is what you see when you log in. your Romeo system, and then you will see your specific study being listed in your, probably the first thing you see under active study or active application, I think. And in that study, there's a tab goes under event. If you click on event, this is what you see. So, because I myself and others in my department, we do get questions like this quite often. I have this situation, what do I do? Which tab do I use? So I thought just quickly go through that. So here, change in status form is when you have, let's say your study has never really like started, meaning that you have never, maybe obviously you've had your ethics approval, you've had your contract signed off, but for sort of whatever reason, you decide not to go ahead with that study, or even sponsor has canceled the study altogether or something like that, then that will be the section that you fill out, change in status form, to letting us know that the study has never started or a study closed due to whatever reason. Or basically, any change in status, study could be on hold because of a situation that happening in COVID, or a study may be finished, or follow-up, depending on wherever you are. Data monitoring committee reports is for certain studies, especially for clinical trials, you do get reports from data monitoring committee reports that it says it needs to be reported to ethics board. That may be the section you might want to use that. Any local unanticipated problems, again, any local events only. Uh, and again, here it says that not any older local events, but events that is unanticipated, and also is inconsistent to whatever it was listed, or so basically whatever was not expected. And unanticipated events need to be reported within 15 calendar days of a PI becoming aware of them, and anything life-threatening reportable local to be reported within 7 calendar days. Again, this is, I would say, is a policy coming from REB. Again, you would have to review your protocol in great detail to make sure how that align with your sponsor requirement. Have that discussion, make sure you have the clear plan there. Non-local unanticipated problem, again, this really varies depending on what type of trials that you're involved in and what sort of study design and all this. There's so many different factors that play to this. But if looking at the REB requirement here, it says any non-local, so any thing that's been reported outside the horizon that was unanticipated and that was believed to be related, perhaps, those need to be reported within specified timeline here. Notification to Research Ethics Board. You use this, anything that you need to send REB information about your study, but it didn't really require a study amendment. Any notice of your study team member, maybe? That would be one example that I can think of right now. Protocol deviation report. So any deviation that you have happened over the course of your study period, report that. And research study annual reapproval, we kind of touched that already. And updated IB, so updated investigative brochure as it becomes available to you.